everyone, it's Cheryl from the Lifestyle Digs, and I'm here to do another video about walking the Camino de Santiago, specifically about navigating all the useless advice that you might find about the Camino if you're looking on forums or Facebook groups and asking questions. You will always get people with opposing answers or people that have outdated advice. I mean, it may be very well-meaning advice, but perhaps they haven't been on the Camino in 5 or 10 years, maybe even longer. So what was true many years ago might be completely different today. So the first thing I want to talk about, number one on the list, is that anyone can walk the Camino. And that is not true. A pilgrim must be physically and mentally strong. So you don't have to be a top world-class athlete by any means, but you do have to be capable of walking approximately 20 kilometers or 15 miles every day. Some days will be a little more, some days will be a little less, but you do have to be physically capable of walking that many miles. And it's not just flat. You're going up very steep mountains in parts, and you're also coming down the same mountains, and sometimes they have very slippery rocks, especially if it's raining or has just been raining, and it's just not easy. And mentally, there's going to be times where the Camino just really challenges you emotionally, and you say to yourself, why am I doing this? I can't do this anymore. I just can't go on, because you've had a hard day. You've been walking, it's either been raining or it's been very, very hot. You couldn't find any food. You're struggling to find a bed to sleep in, and then you just really question yourself. So again, a pilgrim has to be physically and mentally strong. And even if you think you are, the Camino will test you, and you might find that you get aches and pains in places you never had before, or you might have allergies that you never even knew existed. With me, it was knee pain, and not my kneecap, but on the side of my knees. And that happened almost right away. It happened on the hill going down towards Roncesvalles. And I'd never had that kind of pain before in my knees, and it dogged me for quite a few days. I did see a doctor, and I got some prescription length ibuprofen, 600 I believe, and eventually I was able to keep walking. So let's get on to the next one on the list. Number 2, you must buy John Brierley's book. Now, John Brierley wrote a book called A Pilgrim's Guide to the Camino de Santiago, the Way of St. James. Now, that's the most popular Camino, also known as the French Camino, the French Way, or the Camino Frances. So, John Brierley has 31 stages in his book. He talks about walking, what town to stay that night, and then the next day, and so on and so forth. So if you're following John Brierley's advice, you will be staying on stage in these particular towns, and you will arrive in Santiago about 31 days after you have set out from Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port in France. You don't need to buy his book. It's great. If you want to buy it, go ahead. I would recommend getting the Kindle version and reading it on your cell phone, but you don't need to buy it. You can find a lot of advice online about the places that you're planning to stay, the distance you're going. There's a lot of apps that you can download, and they will also mark out how far you want to walk that particular day. Now here's another one, number 3 on my list. The backpack must be 10% of your body weight. Now you will find some pilgrims or former pilgrims who just go apeshit crazy about this 10% rule. Now, where did this 10% rule come from? It was originally aimed at school children with their developing bodies, that their backpacks should not be more than 10% of their body weight. So if you are a fully grown adult, don't worry about that. You don't need to follow that 10% rule. So, let's just go for an example here of how crazy that is. Say you weigh 200 pounds. So you put 20 pounds worth of gear into your backpack, and you walk the Camino. That's great. And 2 years later, you decide you want to walk the Camino again. but now you've put on weight. Now you weigh 300 pounds. So now this means you can put 10% of your body weight, 30 pounds, into your backpack. No, this is not a good idea. I would say most pilgrims' backpacks probably around 15 pounds worth of stuff, give or take 5 pounds. So only you can figure out what you need in your backpack. Most people, when it comes to clothes, they have a set of clothes that they're wearing and they have an extra set of clothes in their backpack. Then they also have any medical supplies that they might need, towels, toiletries, that sort of thing. So your backpack could be any weight. Most people's backpacks probably weigh at least 2 or 3 pounds right there. So throw out that 10% rule. Don't just ignore everybody that talks about it. If your backpack's a little bit heavier than 10% of your body weight and you feel just fine packing along with it, just go with the flow. If you find your backpack is too heavy for you, there are transport companies along the Camino. Every albergue that you stay in will have a couple of envelopes for these companies. It costs about 5 or 6 euros, and they will transport your backpack to the albergue that you're staying in the following night. Now let's stick with backpacks for number 4. Follow the backpacks. I don't know why I read that advice all the time on all these forums when people worry about getting lost and then somebody else says, follow the backpacks. Well, not everybody carrying a backpack is a pilgrim on the Camino de Santiago, especially when you're walking through cities. Could be anybody walking around with a backpack, or you're just another random traveler. Also, one time I had stopped to take a photo, and a group of about 5 or 6 guys walked by me, and other pilgrims with their backpacks on, and then a couple more followed them going down the street. I finished taking my photo, and then I turned to follow them, but there was a woman right behind me, and she goes, in broken English, but still I got the gifts, and she goes, I think it's that way. And I looked, and sure enough, there was a Camino marker down that road. So her and I, off we go, and we were on the correct route. The young fellows that were going the other way, I tried whistling and waving and yelling at them, but they couldn't hear me. And eventually they would have probably joined up, got back on the Camino at some point. But my advice is, if you're going to follow the backpacks, keep checking the app on your phone, the Camino app that you've downloaded, and make sure you are on the Camino and not just randomly wandering off somewhere. So speaking of apps, let's go with number 5, Camino apps. Just about everybody on these forums will have their favorite Camino app, and it's the end all and be all, and don't just ignore all the other apps out there. Well, I have several Camino apps downloaded on my phone, but I found the one that worked best for me, a senior with not so good tech, not so techy, and it was the Ninja Pilgrim, or the Pilgrim Ninja, or no, the Camino Ninja. Got it. I think it was called the Camino Ninja. That worked the best for me. I also found the Wise Pilgrim app was pretty good for finding albergues, places to sleep in. And a lot of people leave reviews. So between the two of them, I made my way. I got myself to Santiago, so it worked. But just download a few apps and just figure out as you go along which one works best for you. Number 6. You must attend the 8 p.m. Mass at Roncesvalles. Now, Roncesvalles would be, if you're going by John Brierley's book, it would be the first night that you stay on the actual Camino Frances. And it's at the bottom of this mountain, where I have my sore feet, my sore knees, and it was pouring rain. And I actually ended up staying there because I just couldn't go any further that particular day. And I went to the 8 p.m. Mass. Well, it's all in Spanish. Now, I speak some Spanish, but I'm not fluent in it to really follow along that well. At one point, they did take communion, and that was the only time that somebody came up and spoke in English and said only confirmed Catholics. Though I have to ask myself, if you're not a confirmed Catholic, why would you want to take communion? But anyway, when they were going up to the front, that was when I went out the back. Really, nothing special happens there. So you don't need to take the 8 p.m. Mass, just skip it. Okay, so I've got my little cheat sheet here that I'm going off. Okay, number 7. You don't need to reserve beds ahead of time on the Camino. No, throw that out the door. That might have been true years ago, but these days, for example, last year, 446,000 pilgrims arrived in Santiago in 2023. So, okay, they're not all going to be on the Camino at the same time you are, but that's still a lot of pilgrim. There's going to be thousands, and you're all competing for beds. So, depending on if you're like me, I had to end up, putting my backpack ahead to lessen the stress on my knees. I had to make a reservation. So some days I would spend 2 hours trying to find a bed. And I ended up using booking.com a lot, which you know, the albergue owners usually charge an extra couple of bucks for those people because of the service fees. But whatever, I did get a bed. So the big problem on the Caminos these days is Camino tourism is huge. There are tour buses taking bus pilgrims along the way. And I found this out very, very early on in the Camino. Within a few days, I spent a night in of course, now I can't remember the name of the town, but it was after Pamplona. It was the first, Estrella, or Estrella, I think. No, maybe I'm wrong. Puente la Reina. I think that might have been a Puente la Reina. Anyway, it doesn't matter. The albergue I stayed in had 38 beds, and there were 35 Koreans in there. Nothing against Koreans. They were with a bus tour. So 35 of them. There were 2 Swiss men, and there were me. So only 3 available beds for pilgrims because the bus tour company had booked 35 beds. And these were all bunk beds for their people on their tour. And when I left the albergue in the morning, there was like 4 big tour buses lined up down the street, all idling away, waiting for the passengers. So you will see this a lot, that there are pilgrims that they walk a little maybe, they ride a bus, they hop off, they get their stamp and their credential. However you want to do the Camino. Actually, that doesn't sound like an all that bad idea to me. But these busloads of people, they're also competing for the beds in the Camino, so it does make it very difficult to find beds. Now, I understand that the municipal albergues and the donativo albergues, they do not take reservations ahead of time. So if you don't want to walk, if you don't want to make a reservation, book a bed in advance, those are the type of albergues that you need to be looking at, the ones that do not take reservations at all. Okay, number 8, you'll be so tired that you'll have no trouble falling asleep. Well, all my life, I've had trouble falling asleep, and the Camino was no different for me. I have slept with earplugs almost my entire life, and I also added an eye mask to help block out the light. But it still didn't work. If you're on a bunk bed and somebody else is either above you or below you and they're moving around, well, that whole bunk bed, it just wiggles and wobbles. So between other noisy pilgrims, people banging into your bed, people flashing lights around, I wouldn't say it was overly noisy at any albergue I was in, but it was definitely very hot in some of the albergues. I started walking the Camino on September 20th. I arrived in Santiago 37 days later on October 27th, 2023. And Spain was northern Spain anyway. That whole route was still experiencing a heat wave. Temperatures 30 degrees Celsius easily every day. So that's about 90 Fahrenheit. And it was hot. And some of the places had fans or air conditioning, just couldn't keep up. So you're not going to fall asleep. If you normally have trouble falling asleep, like me, you're not going to have any better sleep on the Camino. Some nights I did book a private room to help out. Maybe it did a bit, maybe not. Number 9, stretch. That's the other thing you'll see on all these forums and Facebook groups. People are asking advice. They've got some sort of pain. If I'd asked something about my knee, people would have said, stretch, which is, I don't know. It's kind of like my mother when she used to tell me, can you go to the kitchen and get me the... What? She'd always stop talking right at the crucial moment. Likewise, these same people that tell you to stretch, they also stop their advice right at the crucial moment and don't tell you what type of stretches to do. So I did some yoga stretches for my knees, basically some yoga stretches, warrior one, warrior two, a couple where I just kind of lean down, touch the ground, just things to try to stretch the outer area of my legs. And you know, I'm kind of lazy about it. I didn't really keep up with it all that much, but I did try a few stretches, certainly early on when I was originally getting all the knee pain. So to stretch or not to stretch, that's the question, right? And number 10, you don't need a headlamp. You know, I saw this, I experienced this myself when I put my packing list up on a forum and asked people, what do you think? And people told me to ditch the headlamp and to use my cell phone as my flashlight instead. Well, here's the thing. For most people, if you are hiking the Camino, you maybe have trekking poles. You have 2 poles, one in each hand. Well, you don't have a third hand to hold onto your cell phone as a flashlight. I did not have 2 trekking poles. I had 1 hiking staff, and I still wouldn't have used my cell phone. You know, the ground's not the greatest that you're walking on. You never know when you're going to stumble. You drop your phone, you break your phone. I used a headlamp. It worked out really well for me. No trouble at all. So, number 11, training. This is another thing that I see come up all the time on forums, and new pilgrims will ask, how much training should I do for the Camino? And people will give them all kinds of answers like, oh, well, I walked 5 times a week with a full backpack with 15 pounds, 20 pounds of stuff in my backpack. I walk 15 to 20 miles every day, 5 days a week. Anyway, on the Camino, that was actually a question that came up quite a bit with the other pilgrims, and somebody would always ask, hey, did you do any training for the Camino? My observations, 90% of the pilgrims did not do any training at all. 5% said, yeah, you know, I walked around the neighborhood a few times, and maybe another 5% said, yeah, I put my backpack on when I walked around the neighborhood a few times. But for the most part, I did not find any pilgrims did any specific training. And this kind of goes back to number 1 on my list about how anyone can walk the Camino. Sure, anyone can walk the Camino, but you do have to be physically and mentally strong. Like I said, you have to be capable of walking, you know, 15 miles, 20 kilometers every day, more or less. So there you go. Those might be some myths, misconceptions, well-meaning advice, but outdated, what have you. Just take it with a grain of salt and enjoy walking the Camino de Santiago. Buen camino.